Hi everyone. Hi everyone. This is Joy Divergent. I have something beautiful to talk to you about. And not everybody thinks this topic is a beautiful thing. So pay close attention. You ever have one of those experiences that a while back in your life that you absolutely like you wish had never happened? You were humiliated, you were frustrated, and yet didn't know how to make life better at the moment. And so you don't always know exactly how to deal with it. So what? We all live and we learn. But this one is particularly on accountability and responsibility. This story goes into how sometimes we can tend to be a little bit of a brat and not know how to do it in the best of ways so that somebody else's feelings doesn't get hurt. And it's a life lesson that comes around, but when it does, we all get an option to actually learn to love ourselves and each other more. That's where the beautiful part comes in. But it's all beautiful in its own way, in its own mess, and own timing. So if you want to look at life as a yucky history versus a beautiful history, let's say that in this story, I went to go to an event one time, and there was a girl that I met that had invited me along to be with this group, and it wasn't exactly done in the best of ways. She never learned how to take accountability and responsibility for herself, at least not during that event. Not in this way, at least. I searched out for help and made sure that I took accountability and responsibility for my part, even though she didn't choose to. But it doesn't mean she will never learn that lesson. It just means it wasn't her time. And on top of it, I had my own lesson to learn. When I was going through a very challenging time at the moment, I was coming out of 32 years of abuse and trauma. And let's just say it comes with its own baggage. And some of us know that, and some of us haven't been there really yet or haven't owned it yet. So when I started learning about accountability and responsibility, keep in mind you think it's hard to learn the lesson one time. This was a pretty constant thing for a long time that I was having to learn. But this was one of the harder lessons. At the time, I had gotten really angry because of how she was acting around me, how she was treating me, because it was her weekend and she got to do whatever she wanted. But she didn't take into account how to be respectful and nice to others in the meantime, even though it was her weekend. So she was a brat. So she did some really cool things. I called up a friend and was venting, and she overheard me venting. And shortly afterwards, I felt horrible, but not because I had done the wrong thing, but because she pushed her opinion on to me in the sense of saying that I had done the wrong thing. She's like, well, you could have chosen to do it somewhere else. And I'm like, well, I didn't know where else to go. I guess I could have gone for a walk, but one, my fears were getting in my way. I had way too much stuff on my plate before I even arrived, and I was being thrown into a new circumstance, a new situation where I was getting culture shock and didn't trust anybody in the world pretty much at the time. She's like, "Oh, you can trust us," and stuff. Da 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 da. Made it sound like as if it was a fairy tale. And life can be a fairy tale, but it's not something that just happens in an instant, like she was saying it does. It's not always. In this particular case, we went out, we shopped, we got dresses, we went to an event. I'd never had that in my life where it was done in a positive environment. is what it felt like. I may have had a couple times, but something always seemed to be going wrong with it. And I wanted just this weekend just to go well and have fun. But the more that I was around this person, and some things, even now don't make sense. I mean, maybe she just needed to be the brat, needed to be somebody who walked over somebody for that weekend. And maybe stuff was showing up for her too. But unfortunately, both of our paths hit collision course anyway. It didn't go so well, and the group never really acted like they wanted to really talk with me ever again. I don't know what she told them, but I kept on making a fool of myself, trying to go back and make her wrong. If she ever saw this video, I hope she sees it, because I hope she realizes, one, it's not about who was right, but it was about learning a lesson and learning our own personal lessons, but also learning that it's okay for people to use what tools that they have in the world that are already available to them. I was learning to vent. I had never gotten really a full choice to just do venting without people lashing out at me afterwards. I had learned tools that were through another group and stuff that they saw it as, at least she was seeing it as like gossip and me looking her all bad and wrong. And I'm like, no, that's not what this is about. Sometimes when you've been beat down so much within the world, you need to have a way to vent. And sometimes it's very hard to do so, especially when you care about what everybody else thinks. She didn't even think about that. Instead, she decided to think about herself and make it all about her. I was looking to release the emotions and the words and stuff that were bottled up inside of me from all my frustrations from that weekend. And all my insecurities showed up, and I just felt all naked and yuck. Like I didn't want anybody to see me. And because of how frustrated I was with her for not taking accountability and responsibility, granted, I was in a more vicarious stage of my life at the time in some ways, and I thought, oh, it would be fun to let somebody else zip me up. And it doesn't sound like that vicarious unless you know the whole story. But the idea was to help you to understand accountability and responsibility and how it is actually beautiful in the world. Accountability and responsibility helps relieve others the dis-ease when you actually do so. If you actually talk with another individual where you actually did something that was hurtful to them, then sometimes you need to be the one to go back and be the bigger person and apologize, even if they're not willing to hear it at the time. And forgive yourself so that you can actually feel it, that inner peace in yourself again. And also so that you learn the lesson and so you don't make the same mistake again. And by doing so, you actually end up teaching others around you to do the same, so that when it comes time for them to move forward, they go, there's something there actually, but only when they're really ready to see it. Unfortunately, the person wasn't ready to see it at the time, but I was grateful to have the support that I did in order to vent out the emotions, work through whatever issues I had, and finally start to get the life that I really wanted. It was a long road. It was hard. But just because I was a survivor of the sex slave trade or all that mess and mess, we'll just go with mess, with all that mess. And even though that happened, it doesn't mean I don't get to have a good life. It doesn't mean that I don't get to have a decent life. But sometimes we believe that's the case. We believe it because we've been taught that we can't have a decent life without telling lies or being a bully or being a certain way that ends up hurting others more than helping them. Why? Because we believe the lie. But when we actually learn what accountability and responsibility is, and we actually do take accountability and responsibility for our thoughts, our words, our feelings, our emotions, our actions and reactions, kind of, it's like for once you actually begin to find solutions because you become that solution. And it's okay that we learn it in our own timing. You know, the world isn't perfect. We're not perfect. But when we let out our emotions and we let out our thoughts and stuff, yeah, those are pretty authentic, but it's okay. Someone can be angry at you and get to be angry if you really were somebody who did something to them. But even then, there's people that will get angry at you for the smallest of things. And it's not your fault that they don't even know any better, that they haven't had the trainings that you've had, or even that they didn't get to see the good in it. I got to see the good in venting. I got to see the good in taking accountability and responsibility for myself. And in that in itself, it was beautiful. Do I always take accountability and responsibility for myself? Probably not always, because I'm still learning. But I do the best I can with what I've got. As soon as I become aware of it and I realize that I'm the one who needs to take accountability and responsibility, I do so. I take the time to do so. Whether or not we choose to be accountable and responsible is up to us each individually. Sometimes it's hard to do, but sometimes it gets easier given time, given practice, and practicing taking accountability and responsibility perfectly and learning how you can actually. When I went through as a child and was born into the sex slave trade, got out by the time I was 8, I had someone who later described something to me that would probably be of value to you. They were teaching me just about accountability, not even responsibility yet. They were just teaching me about accountability. Now, keep in mind, I had been asking and asking and asking what accountability and responsibility were. Like, what were they really? Even to the point of asking in front of an entire room as a grown adult. And I'm like, I wish that I could just understand, is what I felt like. And it was hard. And it was scary. But it was doable. Some people don't want to take accountability and responsibility because they're afraid of what might happen. They're afraid. Flat out just have fear in them. And if they don't know what their actual options are, the fears actually continue to build. And sometimes we don't have very many options, actually. When you are taking a moment for, let's say you're playing a card game, and you got a really bad hand of cards. And some people will just sit there and they'll finish the game and they'll feel all crappy or whatever else and stuff, and they won't go back to play the game. I used to be like this. But then there was times when I actually went back and I started playing the game and realized when somebody else brought this to my attention, if you don't like the hand that you're dealt, choose a new one. And other times, we don't always know what those new cards are going to look like. So sometimes it helps to have other people that have been down that road, been down that path, that will actually acknowledge what you've been through and help you to see what kind of challenges you're actually dealing with. The people that were a part of the sex slave trade and these drugs and everything else and stuff, like I met one of them once, my gosh. And luckily I was in a space to deal with it appropriately and stuff, but if I had been a child, I would have been so screwed. And man, but understand this. People out there are going to do what they do, whether we say something or not, it seems like most of the time, because, well, we all have a rebel in us. But we also all have the option of choosing something different. And accountability and responsibility helps with that. It's a true tool if you actually learn how to use it. And once you release the emotions and all the gunk that goes with it and stuff, accountability and responsibility actually becomes that much easier. I wish that I could just take away all the bad that has happened in the world and help others to know what it's like to actually get a good life for once. And what I mean by that is I'm watching Lizzie McGuire. I'm not even a teenager, okay? I'm watching Lizzie McGuire on TV or Disney Plus or whatever they call it now. And I didn't get to really do a whole lot of that growing up. But when I did, I mean, heck, I was the kid that would be sneaking to go watch TV when mom and dad weren't looking. And we're at work, and I would hurry and switch back the channel and stuff real quick before they came and everything. And I'm like, who here hasn't done that? Especially if you've had parents that don't allow you to do those kind of things very much. And it was like, you know what? I'm going to allow myself to be like a kid today. And today I've kind of allowed myself that. So normally I'm not wearing black clothing like this as much, but like what some other individuals will choose and stuff, I tend to find my own design of how I actually usually prefer to dress. I just happen to be wearing clothes that are for comfort purposes today. But the interesting thing that I find along the way was accountability and responsibility was described to me in this way. What happened to me happened to me. But imagine that I am a piece of cement, is how the person put it to me. They're like, imagine a piece of cement. And the cement got frozen. And the cement, as it gets frozen so much and it gets so cold that eventually that when it drops or something that's basically causing it to break without really even seeing where the cause came from. And let's say that the cement didn't know exactly what to do next. It just felt so broken and didn't know why this was happening to it. But at some point, it decides to move forward. Well, how can you move forward? How could the cement move forward at this time? And the only way that it could was by putting back the pieces, bringing the pieces back to itself. And that's exactly what I had to do. I had to start allowing myself to bring back the pieces to myself and actually allow myself to learn that the only thing that I really needed to do was to be accountable for being there. That was it. I didn't need to take on the responsibility of what others had actually done to me. Was it fair? No. Was it right? No. Did it hurt? Yeah, hell yeah. And I guess not everybody wants to acknowledge that they can be a kid again and they can have fun in life. But it took me a long time to get there. I I had to leave everything again and again and again. And every time that I did this, it got harder to start life over. But finally, one day, I left it all. I kept on trying to start over on my own. But this time, I had help. This time, I had support. Sometimes it's hard for us to keep moving forward if we don't have that support. That's why I'm offering what I'm offering when I do the business that I do. And I'm doing it at a pretty cheap price, actually. Most people charge at least $100 an hour for a therapist. And I've had people say to me, I will charge you $250 an hour for what you do. Like, not charge you, but like pay you $250 an hour and stuff just because of what I could do. And that was at the time. Then later I had somebody else who came back to me and said that they went and talked and spoke to somebody and said that I had given them information that was worth millions. I also had shared information with other people along the way that said just the product alone that you are doing, the product and services of what you're talking about, the whole package deal at the very least is at least $2,000. Okay? I do it $40 a month. Why? COVID happened. People were stuck in their homes. Not everybody could go out for work. And if you can't even pay $40, I turned it into something so that there was alternate routes in case there was that challenge that was financial. But I was so tired of seeing the world suffer that I decided to do something about it instead. I learned to take accountability and eventually, where I needed to, responsibility. The second thing that came along with this was when someone brought to my attention about taking accountability and responsibility in the ways that were saying, you did this or whatever kind of thing. It's like, you're the one who's the bad and wrong. My ex and I, we were like at each other's throats in a sense. Like, not really per se, because I've seen people come out of worse situations, but at the same time we were. And on top of it, he had a dirty lawyer. It didn't help. That significant other that I had once in my life, he's still a significant person to my daughter's life. And so what can I do to take accountability and responsibility? I did what I could to pick up the pieces once again. And then I learned where I needed to be taking responsibility at. And that was to help my daughter. Sometimes we don't have that person that we're trying to help, but sometimes we're that person that needs help. I didn't want to ask for help because I had been taught to be afraid to ask for help. But half the incidences that are happening out there nowadays, either people don't know how to take accountability and responsibility yet on a conscious level, or they're learning, but sometimes they mess up and they get to learn a life lesson. And sometimes they refuse to learn that life lesson and run away from the true answers that are on the other side of that. till they end up running for the rest of their lives. I don't see that as something that really helps them or anybody else, but they see it as it helps them. But here's the other thing about that. Sometimes people are put in prison only because a belief that has built so much that they end up being there. Not even because they were responsible for what happened. My adoptive mother was the one who was responsible more than my adoptive dad. But my adoptive dad was the one who ended up in prison because she blamed him and told the police that he was the one who did things. It wasn't really the full truth. Yes, he did do things to us, but it was because of her manipulation and coercing and probably even blackmailing is my bet. But, I will never know the entire whole story, but I know enough of the story to know that she wasn't taking accountability and responsibility for her actions. She definitely hadn't been taught how to. She'd been taught the opposite, how to be codependent on everybody else. That's kind of what life dealt us. But as life moved on, I sought out other people's help and kept on asking people to explain to me, what is that again? Please explain that to me again, because I'm having a really hard time understanding this. And eventually I learned. I learned enough to get me to where I am today. Sad truth, but it's the truth. But it's also beautiful because when I get through this, and I know that I will, along the way, I get to show other people it's just as possible. That's taking accountability. That's taking responsibility. Showing people that things are possible. Not being a victim. When we finally decide to change how we deal with things, the interesting thing I think is that as a child, I actually began to learn that in my life I was taking accountability and responsibility, but I also was taking on the blame. And blame is usually where somebody projects onto you that it's your fault, and then you take it on. Usually that's the case for individuals, especially those that have been victimized over and over again. And we've been told we can't have a beautiful life, we can't have a good life. Well, that's not the case anymore. It wasn't even then, that's the funny part. Back then it was challenging, it was hard, but it was beautiful in its own way. I ended up discovering people along the way that I just ended up being really grateful for. Even my mom, even though I got really angry with her a lot because of how she treated me, there's days, granted, do I still have stuff that surfaces up and I'm just absolutely pissed with her for what she did. Not just my adoptive mother, but like one of my stepmoms or something like that. Yeah. Or even one of my foster parents or something. Yeah, I still have stuff that surfaces up every now and then. But it's not the same anymore. And that in itself is a transformation. Accountability and responsibility can do that to you. It helps you transform your life as soon as you decide. We're all kind of stuck in this world at different times, and I could choose to still be angry at those who did what they did to me, or I can let it go. I can choose to say that this person deserves this and this person deserves that. Well, they don't deserve that. Hell no. They've already been kicked down enough. That's why they keep on doing what they're doing. Anything, they deserve praise and love. Unconditional love. Because they've been taught that they're bad and wrong in this world if they don't do what they do. It's really messed up, granted. Recently, I ended up watching a movie that was Maleficent, and it's the second one where she, I won't spoil it for those who haven't watched it, but there's a piece in it that shows the dark and the light together. And it's the hardest thing to imagine that that's even a possibility. But it's a choice. Everybody deserves a happy ending. Even they do. If not anybody, it is them that deserves it. And stuff. Like, I had people trying to tell me that I deserved it, and I did not want to believe it. Because I thought I was rotten to the core. And that was just as a child. But I worked through enough of my issues now that I was able to have a good support team in place to make sure I didn't fall back into that same victim stance or those same teachings that others taught me once. That's what you need too. If you're the one who is dealing with those kind of challenges and you don't know how to do these things, start seeking out a team. Start seeking out actual help. If you can't go to therapy because you've been brainwashed into believing that you can't go out and tell anybody and go to therapy and stuff, then find an alternate route. Keep looking for somebody who is from that unconditional loving energy. It's not going to continue to sit there and hurt you over and over and over again. In fact, they're just going to walk you through probably a lot of different processes. And usually those are life mentors, life coaches, life guides, gurus. But there's also more to it than that. You can be your own spiritual guide. You can be your own person. The people that are therapists and stuff, they are just beginners in self-growth, and some of them are legendary, depending on where you look at around the world, for therapists even. And they're just there to try and teach you how to do something different. But if there's one of them that's not being accountable and responsible, that's sitting there trying to tell you and stuff that, this is how your life is at home and rewriting your story for you, then you need to seek a different therapist, because that one's not going to work for you. That one's going to sit there and try and tear you down and put you on medications that doesn't work for you. And for me, medications didn't work. In fact, I had to go an alternate route. That's why I meant bring this up, is with accountability and responsibility. I had to be accountable and responsible for myself and my thoughts, my feelings, my actions, my reactions. How did I do that? Well, one of the ways that I did that for at least that area was that I kept on seeking for something that was going to work for me and not against me. Okay. But let's say for a moment that there was other items out there, whether it's food, whether it's a brain nutrition supplement, which was one of the things that helped me, nutrition. Let's say that it was also a Cellerciser. That's a mini trampoline with the bars, like you've seen them probably in there, but they've got different builds so that it's not the same as like the Walmart brand. The Walmart brand one is basically for kids, but even then it doesn't quite support the child and their back and stuff like that. It just helps them to just go and jump on something and spring over to the other side of the room, maybe, who knows. But that was one of the other things that helped me. But these were different things that I used over time. And I've been working on creating a website. I've been working on creating a support system that is for those that are really just still dealing with these kind of challenges, that just don't know how to do it differently. And why on YouTube? Well, because right now we're dealing with coronavirus stuff. And on top of it, a lot of people watch online stuff now, and it's because they either have to or because it's the only way that they can and stuff, or it's a way of life for them, even possibly because some people are YouTube bingers and stuff like that. I decided to take a look at what some people were doing and just begin to change my life. I took what I had, like, with resources around me, and became resourceful. And then I also would check in with myself and say, okay, how can I move forward now? That was me learning to be accountable and responsible, because I got to ask myself the question and I let myself ask the question instead of being in my own way. But the more that I teach and the more that I share what I do, the more that it actually helps bring me out of the mess. Because somehow it allows me to start to learn how to take that accountability and that responsibility even all the more. Not always because there's somebody watching in the sense of like I'm worried that I'm going to be in trouble anymore, where as much as it is that I'm like, people are actually getting help. Some people's lives are even being saved. And I'm sharing my story, and that's pretty much it. I didn't even have to be one of the individuals to go out there and, how do I put this? Be a police officer or something like that. There's different ways to help support people. By doing service and supporting people, it helped me to move forward and learn from my own mistakes while I was teaching others. And I wanted to help my daughter, for instance. One day she had a new sibling in her life that was brought into her life without her hearsay choice, per se. And that sibling decided to say to her that my dad's going to kill your dad. That's a pretty heavy topic for a child to be dealing with. And I don't mean just the one that's hearing it from the other child, because that was heavy and I had to deal with that part and let her know that I'm here. But the other child that's dealing with that kind of thought, something tells me that they've been taught hatred on such a severe scale that they don't know another way. And so I do the best I can to keep teaching my daughter to use what I know so that she can help others too. Now, whether or not she uses it fully always on her own, I don't know if she does or not. But maybe given time, she'll find the courage to do so. I know that I've seen her do just astonishing things. She wants to build her own business. She's just a kid. She's not even no, she's not even a teenager yet. She's getting close, but that's beside the point. A child can have loads of information just as much as an adult can. And half the time, us as adults don't want to admit it. And even then, we want to cover up that they know something sometimes. Why? Because our ego gets in the way. My significant other from before, he would tell me and stuff that, no, she's not that smart. I'm like, yeah, she is. He wasn't willing to admit that because he didn't know how to admit that he was that smart to begin with himself, because he wasn't allowed to show it. So where can you take accountability and responsibility? Where can you actually look in the mirror and go, you know what? Today's a new day. Today's a different day than when that happened. That was in the past. Even if it was 5 minutes ago, that was in the past. And I'm here now. I get to move forward. Be the change and the transformation you wish to see in the world, so that you too can transcend out of the prisoner's matrix. We feel like sometimes our gifts are a curse, or the knowledge that we know is a curse, or that it's worthless because we can't use it. Well, that's just because either we've been taught that, or we chose to actually believe what the person was teaching us, or we just decided it. It doesn't mean that it's exactly the easiest to switch gears on, especially when you've been taught so much to look the other direction. But all you're doing is going, you know what, there's a path on the left and there's a path on the right. And then there's one right down the center. But none of these are working for me. I need to find a different path, see if there's another one out there. And you start looking for that other path. And sometimes it shows up immediately, and sometimes it doesn't. But sometimes even the one that shows up immediately will not always stay. Why? Because we don't believe it. We don't allow ourselves to have the faith that something good is going to happen, because we've been taught that there's so much bad in this world that it's ridiculous, and that there's never going to be a way to do it. But there is, as soon as we decide it. So learn to take accountability. Learn to take responsibility. Find the beauty in life that it gives you. With me, I didn't have this a year ago. I was homeless even about 5 months ago. It was April. I was homeless for a year in different ways, different strides. And the funny thing is that the point of bringing up the Maleficent movie was this. I had people while I was at the homeless shelter and going through the challenges that I did, even those that perceived me as the villain sometimes, that looked at me and go, she's one of us. When you watch those movies, you begin to see what I mean, especially when you watch the second one. People sometimes it's just one individual that has so much hatred that doesn't know how to really deal with all that hatred, that is the leader of some of these people that are commanding all this to be done, or sometimes it's multiple leaders that are doing the same thing because they feel so trapped. They haven't really been allowed to be their true self as a true leader. They've been put into positions that seem impossible. And sorry, my neck's hurting. The idea is that you finally get to go where you want to go. You get to start creating the life that you want. And if you don't know how, that's part of why people like myself are here. Maybe I'm not a good fit for you. Maybe I am. If you feel it resonates and you feel like you really are ready to go down that alley, let me know. But keep in mind, I don't just do it a little bit. I help people to go really in depth. And it's one of the people that I love to watch his YouTube videos. It says, hello, deep divers. I can't believe I just said that on here. Anyway. Deep divers, chosen ones. Just, I mean, you know if you're that person. And if you're not, and you're one of the people that likes to try and tear down the other person, I invite you to look at something different. What about a win-win scenario? And do you know what that looks like? Where you get to win and I get to win. Where everybody gets to win. That's what I noticed off of that movie, was that it was a story about how there was people seeking to have win-win scenarios and not just I win and you lose kind of attitude, that I'm better than you. Some people absolutely just kept on trying to tell me, I want you to say that I'm better than you, kind of thing, like they want me to say that statement. And I'm like, no, it doesn't resonate, because I'm not. I'm maybe just as good as you, but not better than you. Maybe better than you in doing one thing that you're not, but I'm okay with that, because we all get to actually help each other then. We all have something that we're good at, something that we can actually help each other see something, a different angle. People that are our enemies are not even our enemies. They were there to teach us something, and we didn't learn the lesson sometimes. And it gets worse and bigger and bigger and bigger until we learn that lesson. So if you've been a victim of somebody who's been a killer, if you've been a victim of somebody who's been a rapist, if you've been a victim of somebody who's been dragged out of their home, or dragged you out of your home, taught you that you were the villain while the other person was the victim, and that you would never get to have any interaction with each other. Guess what? I was taught that about my own brother. And you know what I realized? That was their perception. They chose to believe that he was the villain and that I was the victim. And for a long time, I haven't spoken to him because of that. They did that. And then I played along. Am I proud of it? No. I love my brother dearly. But some people haven't grown up yet. Some people don't know what it's like to grow up and realize that we're not all separate, but yet we try to live as if we are separate. When really we are all one. I kept on trying to say something to somebody once, saying that what is in you is in me. And their perception of things, of what they would do to look at that, was saying, you're in a cult. And I'd sit there and be like, no. I know what it's like to be in a cult. This is not no cult. This is a new way of life for me. Why? Because that way of life that was happening when I was a child, that technically legally has been labeled as cults, didn't serve me, didn't help me, it hurt me. But as I allowed myself to heal, interestingly enough, they gave me the biggest gift of all. I just didn't know how to see the gift. The gift that they gave me was to show me my own strength. The gift that they gave me was to show people that anything's possible. We may not want to always acknowledge the terrible things that are not happening out there in the world, and some of us don't want to acknowledge the good that's happening out there in the world either. But just like the big, bad, terrible hair day or whatever that book is called. I probably just slaughtered the name, sorry. But the big, bad, no good, horrible day, whatever book and stuff, people can decide that it's a horrible day and that you have really messy hair when you wake up with a bedhead, or they can decide, you know what, today's my bedhead day, or today's my crazy hair day, or something like that, and own it. It's not a bad thing. Yes, it happened. So what? Make it a fashion trend somehow. I know Albert Einstein did. He'd sit there and he'd make his hair all crazy, and then he'd stick his tongue out and go, meh, and make people laugh. He was a genius at math of its own kind. But do you know when Nikola Tesla was asked, so what's it like, or, oh no, it was Albert Einstein that was actually asked, I believe, what's it like to be a genius? And he goes, I don't know, we asked Nikola Tesla. Both people were geniuses in their own way. Both of them just knew different languages. Some languages had more of an impact and more of a way to create something. The other one took longer to do it. I just decided to take the shortcut like Nikola Tesla. Go to my spirit. My spirit knows the answers. So does yours. One day you'll understand what that means if you don't already. One day you'll be able to have so many other people see you for who you really are if they don't already. And maybe, just maybe, when you're ready, you'll be able to see who you are, even if you don't already. And people can sit there and argue and try and defend, I know who I am. Oh, there goes ego again. Have fun with that one. Holding on to this anger serves me. Okay, have fun with that one. We don't have to suffer for an eternity. We don't have to even live with Alzheimer's and all these other things. We don't have to have where some people are absolutely big like me and others anorexic. We don't have to have that. We don't have to have people out there dealing with diabetes and all this junk. But yet we choose it. Why? It was the life path we chose before we came here. Why? Well, that was something for us to know, each individually, and why we chose it. Sometimes there are individuals that know how to see those answers, but not everybody. The individuals that can see those answers usually are shunned, and in the past were said to have had witchcraft and whatever else and stuff. And I'm like, dude, if we actually treated each other with dignity and respect for what the ability was that the other person has, it's an ability. And yet we feel like we have to label it as something bad and wrong and give it a bad energy. Every single thing out there that has ever been labeled probably bad and wrong has its own purpose. Every person that's been labeled bad and wrong has its purpose. Even a name has a purpose. I've had my name changed so many times throughout my life, it's ridiculous. But what I found was that each one was helping me to get where I really wanted to go in this life. Wrap your head around that one for a minute if you haven't already done that. Or you can continue to argue and let ego show up. It's your choice. I invite you to really look deep within sometimes. Not all the time, but some of the time at the very least. Find the answers you really are seeking because they are within you. You don't have to wait till after this life to get them. Know that you're loved. Big Bear has no mistake. Where's that instrument? Oh, sorry.